I had sort of clued into the fact that all the most successful people were sort of sober, right? They don't need substances to get the most out of life. Like, these are the people that thrive on waking up really early. Now I'm one of those people, right? Like, I wake up really early on my own without an alarm. I don't even drink caffeine. I'm just living my best life. But it's so wild because if you told me 3 years ago that I would be sober, I would have laughed you out of a room. I loved drinking. Right. And I never swore off alcohol. You know how people get really hungover and they're like, I'm never drinking. I never said that, even in my worst hangovers. That's why I wrote this piece. So on my LinkedIn, I have the piece, 1 year alcohol free. And it really blew up because I think a lot of people resonated with the fact that, yeah, she never was going to swear off alcohol, right? I think in the scheme of things, like in the path that I wanted to take in terms of growing as a person, right, I think that your growth is stunted if you're drinking.
Just want to take this opportunity to welcome Sam Puhala to our show today. It's great having you here today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
And sharing an amazing story about your journey from what is considered to be normal every day to breaking the norm for yourself.
Yeah.
And through some interesting levels of difficulty, but getting through it and doing it confidently and making it through, not surviving, but then thriving through it.
Exactly, thriving. And I think that's really what I want for everybody. So
thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me.
What I found interesting about you specifically was that, first of all, you're a lawyer. And doing that and walking around with this sense of, and I wanted to be a lawyer too one day. And it's like, it's a serious job.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Especially in criminal defense.
Okay. Right?
Stakes are high.
Super serious.
Yeah.
Stressful.
Very stressful. Yeah.
I mean, when you look at what lawyers go through, we've had this conversation before here, I think. The amount of stress, the amount of work that you have to go through, the targets that you're aiming at, the opposition that you have to what you do on a daily basis, right? We don't see that, so it's hard for us to really appreciate it. But it's one of the things that leads to such a, like all the results of what stress causes and leads us to. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't start after you get called. It's from the day you decided you're going to be a lawyer. Like, maybe people around you.
Oh yeah, even law school. Like, I personally didn't find law school as stressful as a lot of my colleagues, but I think certainly the practice is very stressful, and stress is a huge problem in the profession. So I think there's statistics even locally in Ontario. I think the Ontario Bar Association had some studies that suggest that lawyers they have 4 times the rates of substance abuse and mental health problems as the general population,
right?
Because of the stress, I think.
Yeah.
So the divorce rates are really high. People are, alcohol is a huge problem in the profession.
Right.
So I'm coming up on 2 years sober. I don't drink at all anymore. And like, that's, I was like the sober one in my
So
crowd.
it's 4 times harder for you to do that, actually, right?
I found it easy. What's not easy is like living sober, right? Especially in a very boozy world. But the stress is just crazy. And I think also there's a lot of vicarious trauma in the practice, right? Certainly in criminal defense. So we're exposed to a lot of, horrific things.
So take this back from you, right? So when you're starting out in law school, right? Obviously, the reason for getting into it, it's very fulfilling work when you look at it from the starting line. You're like, wow, I get to make a difference.
Yeah, I love what I do so much. It's very deeply ingrained in my personal values, right? In freedom, independence. I'm like punk rock, right? So I, like, as a teenager, I was, I think, very argumentative, very counterculture. I still am. I live a very unconventional life, I think, to most, right? Like, I'm not married. I don't have kids. I'll never, I live life on my terms. And I think there's nothing more punk rock than like standing up to the immense resources of the state, shoulder to shoulder with your client. It's literally me, my client, up against the whole state, the Constitution. It's me fighting for my client, right? So I'm literally fighting for people's freedoms.
You get a kick out of this.
Yo, yeah.
It's fun
like,
to you.
It is so fun. There is nothing like being in a courtroom, and I get into it. Like, even just the other day I was in court and I was just like, why hasn't the Crown done this? Like, what, I'm really on it, and I really love it. So, and it is very rewarding work, right? Because I think it's misunderstood, but I think people don't really understand what's at stake until they're in that position.
Did you have to work on practicing smiling while you were saying this? Because I've never heard somebody smile so much when they're talking about law. It's a serious matter, and criminal law.
Yeah.
Yeah, you seem to be having a good time with it.
Oh, yeah.
What?
Actually,
that doesn't add up.
At the courthouse, I'm often like, people point out that I smile a lot. So I am just very smiley. Like I have a very positive disposition.
But in the world of law, don't they kind of like look down on that, or do they? No.
I think that you have to really
It sounds like you're not taking it seriously enough.
Well, I take it very seriously, but I think you have to very much be yourself. Because if you're not yourself, then like, if you try to be this like serious lawyer, like, I mean, I am, right? Like when I'm in court and I'm making submissions, it's serious.
Sure.
But I'm very much myself, right? So like you have to bring your personality to it. It's a very personal, very person-driven, people-driven profession, especially if you're dealing with juries. And I'm very much myself. So, I even have to work on my poker face a little bit because some of the stuff that we see, right?
Yes.
And it's like nerves too, right? Like being here, it's sort of like, I think it's meeting new people.
Yeah.
But I do think that I'm just always smiling. So even like my teacher, I had a teacher, my physics teacher, math teacher, when I was in grade 9 was always like, you're always smiling, like even when you're mad.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm just a big smiler.
Then it becomes
life's
even
too short
more
to be angry.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Sam. But when you first started on your path now, so you're in law school and you're obviously attentive and aware of your surroundings and how everybody else is. There's workload, there's stress. You did notice it. It's not like you don't notice the workload. It's not like you don't notice how difficult it is.
Oh yeah, no, it's very it's obvious immediately. So to get into law school, right, it's competitive. So you need at least 2 years, although it's more like 3 or 4. I recommend that people do the 4. So if you're in a rush to become a lawyer, you need a 4-year undergrad, I think. Yeah. So minimum 2 years in university to even apply, right? Mm-hmm. You need a high average to get in. Again, I think that I tell people who, like I mentor a lot of students, right? And they're like, should I do my 4th year of my undergrad? I was like, yes, because that's where you learn how to write. Do a thesis, right? I presented my undergraduate thesis internationally. Right. I've been all over the world presenting on research that I've done. Learn how to read and write, go to your seminar classes, right? Write a thesis. That's just my view, right? Sure. You do you. There are a lot of people who are in a rush to become a lawyer. They're like, I don't need that. So it's true, you can save a lot of money. But it's very competitive even to get to law school, right? Right. And so you have all these top performers, the top of their classes, and they get there and, now all of a sudden the workload has tripled or quadrupled, right? Yeah. So admittedly, I didn't really do a lot of work in law school. I mean, it's hard work, but I was like very much like listen in class, right? Like I would go to class and I would listen. There's none of this Facebook stuff. It's like, what are you even doing here in class, right? And you have those in your undergrad too, but it's a different, like I like to work smart, right?
So when you got there, you noticed what I was kind of getting to as well was there's a way that things are done. That's what's considered to be right, like conventional.
Oh yeah, and I did not follow that.
So, but you didn't, obviously. Yeah. But then I guess that's the most interesting thing is that when everybody's doing things a certain way, and you realize that you're a little bit of an outlier. You're like,
always.
There's a pressure innately, right, that you feel on kind of complying or, following
the norm.
The norm.
Yeah. And
so you get left out of things otherwise.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was bullied in law school.
What?
Oh, yeah. Like,
what does bullying in law school mean? I've never even heard of that. I heard that happens in law.
I don't know how it happens elsewhere, but I think that I was
bullied in public school, like in law school. How do you get bullied?
I think that there's a lot of stress and pressure and also competitiveness in law school. So I can only speak to my experience, right? I do think that there's a lot of collegiality. Okay. But I just felt, excluded. And I don't hold that against anyone. I think that people they have a lot of imposter syndrome. I don't personally believe in imposter syndrome. That's a whole other interesting topic. But it's hard, right? Because you're taking on all this debt, all this risk with your studies, right? You've been in school for so long already. You're sacrificing a lot of your life to dedicate to school. And earlier when I said I didn't have to work that hard, like I did work hard. It's just I approached it very differently. So
what do you mean by very different?
well, just like, instead of trying to read everything that they give us, right? Like they just give you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages every day to read, right? Like you can't read it all. So you have to learn how to approach and what's necessary, right?
Okay.
And I was told that from day one of law school. And like, I didn't even want to be a lawyer when I got to law school. Like I was only there because I was, involved in student government and the president of so I was going to maybe go into lobbying or something more government centered. But then when I got there, I was like, this is the best. Day one, I was like, I'm going to be a criminal defense lawyer. And my whole career was set up that way. So I think also criminal defense is it's really its own sort of special area of law that's very different from the rest.
Right.
You're not going to corporate or civil, like you have these big firms, right? So I wasn't doing the on-campus interviews. I wasn't, looking for the same placements that other people were. But I think it just...
But then how did you think you were going to get to success when everyone tells you this is the path to success?
I think again, knowing myself, right? I've always been very true to myself. So, everyone says you have to take these classes to do well, right? You have to have these study habits. You have to have these notes. You have to schmooze with these people.
Right.
And I'm just like, no, I'm going to do it my own way, right? And so I didn't take the classes that are like real estate, right? Why am I going to take real estate? I know they say strongly.
Sam, you're a logical person. You're told here is the path to success.
Yeah.
You haven't been to the end yet.
No. Well, and statistically, people like me don't end up in law school, right? Because they don't come from privilege. Like I was raised by a single mom. I'm first generation Canadian, and no one in my family is a lawyer.
Right.
So first generation lawyer as well. Obviously, I do have, I do have other privileges, right? Like I'm white and, I speak English and French. So that helps a lot in terms of I did go to a French law school. But yeah, there's a lot of barriers to access to the profession, right? So like a lot of people, they can't even get the loans to go to law school, right? Like I don't come from money. And the rate of borrowing apparently at the undergraduate level is 60%. So 60% of people who are studying at the undergraduate level borrow money to go to school. That tuition prices are triple the cost usually of your undergraduate studies, and the borrowing rate drops down to 20%. So that tells you everything you need to know about who's going to law school, right? Multi-generational lawyers, a lot of wealth. Like I didn't have a trust fund to go to law school, right? So for me, it's very much like if I'm going to do this, like they don't even get the loans to go, right? So I worked on building my credit score when I was young, right? So that I could get this 6-figure loan without a cosign. And you just have people that, they don't even have access to it. Obviously, there's scholarships and everything, but yeah, so there's lots of barriers that even go there. And so when I got there, it was very much like criminal defense really resonated with me because I took a class in my undergraduate degree, like an intro to criminal law class that I really loved. And I just knew, like on my first day of law school, I just knew. And so I knew that I would be successful in that field because I had a goal. And I think everything in me really aligns to I don't even call it a vocation or a career. It's a calling. Like I had a calling to criminal defense. And because it is sort of the against the grain, like the lone wolves of the profession.
So you turn that into your motivator.
Yeah.
That's
I was like,
crazy.
Like I know where I'm going and it's a different path than, working in these big firms or whatever. Like lots of people enjoy that. And so like I wasn't even signing up for these interviews, right? I was like, I'm going to do everything that's going to set me up for success in criminal law. And so I literally Googled like criminal defense, like there were these events that I found. And so there was this organization and I was out in New Brunswick, like I was 2,000 kilometers away from everything I knew. Like, I was in a long-term relationship. That relationship ended. Like, I was basically in the middle of nowhere for me, right? Studying, and I didn't have a network there. And I was there for the program and for the French language, right? Because in Ontario, we don't have a French law school. There's only there's a bilingual institution, Ottawa U. But you have to, my understanding is that you have to study some courses in English. And anyway, I wanted to do fully in French, like, my T4As.
So let's just make this a little harder.
Yeah. And it's my third language, right? Like, let's just put the weights on and go in the water, right? Like,
At some point in time, Sam, did you notice or did you ever feel that, what am I doing?
Oh, all the time.
What?
Even now.
Really? So when this starts happening, usually there's that, uh-oh moment, and it can spiral very, very fast from there.
Yeah.
So give me an uh-oh moment while you're at law school thinking, maybe I'm doing this wrong. Maybe I shouldn't be here and maybe I'm not going to make it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like, I don't know, once I got there, I was like, this is the best thing ever.
Never had a problem like that.
I think it was more like cutting the cord on like that community that I had, right? Like you're building your networks and everything and like sort of moving somewhere.
Just being isolated.
Yeah, being isolated, right? I did find the first year especially quite isolating, but you need to find your community, right? So I Googled like, what are these organizations that I can be a part of? And I found the Criminal Lawyers Association in Ontario.
Right.
And I became a member. Like I had to like get my professor to sign off on the fact that I was in a law school, right? And then I started getting access to different events and I was going and meeting like the greats, like Marie Hennen had, you know, she was at an event and I just met sort of like the top criminal lawyers in the country.
Plenty. So you're getting your dose of connection. You're getting your dose of motivation and inspiration.
Yeah.
Right. So those become your drivers. But you would always be noticing that here's the way things are done, even amongst criminal lawyers. Right. And you're not, it's the norm. Yeah. And really the thing that I focus in on here is the amount of stress. And you talked about like what did you call it? The boozy culture?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that becomes a thing everywhere, regardless of whether you're going into law or anything else.
Oh, yeah. My whole life.
And you've seen it.
The path less traveled, right?
Right.
The path less traveled.
And you can't, it's considered like part of socializing.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're not able to socialize the same way. What do you do instead to socialize? Or you said it's been 2 years, so you weren't always doing that, right? So you were accepting the norm. You were going with the flow on that.
Yeah. Well, I was definitely a drinker before, right?
You were, okay.
So in law school, I mean, I'd probably my biggest party days were in my undergrad, right? But even in law school, you know, I socialized, I drank, and certainly getting acquainted because I returned to sort of southwestern Ontario where my family's from.
Okay.
I mean, my family's from Eastern Europe, Poland and Hungary, but I was born in Woodstock, Ontario.
Okay. And
London's not too far from there. So and now I have offices in both because of course I went against the grain and launched my firm, you know, earlier than most people do.
Crazy.
But it's socializing without alcohol is not for everybody, right? Like a lot of people find that they have social anxiety. Alcohol sort of helps inhibit them.
So let's talk about first socializing with alcohol, right? Like, I mean, it seems to work for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good bonding. And in fact, I forget who said it. There's a quote like, I don't trust a man who, you know, I don't trust a person who doesn't have a drink. Right?
Oh, okay.
So I've heard that before. And I sort of get it because even politicians, like I think there are studies that show that politicians from sort of contention, like if there's political tensions, you know, if you have diplomats that are sort of having libations, it can sort of encourage collegiality, right? And I'm not denying those things, right? But I'm not saying that people should stop drinking. I mean, the reason that I stopped drinking was because of the new health guidelines that came out roughly 2 years ago.
Stop.
Yeah.
You did it just because of some health guidelines.
Well, there's
so many guidelines out there. Why would you pick this?
Well, and as someone who's like very counter, like, you know, culture, but I do think that I just look at it like cigarettes now, right? Like I think educated people who look at the new research coming out about alcohol, it's going to change. And since I didn't even go public about my sobriety until I hit a year. Because the statistics on educated people who are not addicts, like I'm not an addict, right? Like people drink around me. I have tons of booze at my place. And that doesn't trigger me. I'm fortunate that way. But it's still such an integral part of society, right? And I'm fine with doing my own thing. Like I don't have to do what other people are doing, right? I'm very much myself, so I don't need it to. I have a better time now, actually. So your dopamine levels are affected by alcohol, and it takes. I'm not even through the woods yet. It takes a full 2 years, apparently, up to 2 years for your neurochemistry to reset from alcohol. And I was more of like a weekend warrior, social drinker, right? Like I never drank daily, I never drank alone, but it's something that is so ingrained in culture.
Yeah.
Every event, right, peddles alcohol. And so it's hard for people, like in the beginning, I didn't tell people that I wasn't drinking. So I'd have either non-alcoholic drinks, and I'm sort of like life of the party personality. So people assume that I'm drunk. Like I have non-alcoholic wines and people think that I'm, you know, drinking because I'm having a good time.
Right.
But I didn't do that for the first months
And
because
this was because of a health guideline you read?
well, it's the health. I think I was sober curious anyway, and alcohol.
What does sober curious mean?
So sober curious is when you're critically looking at the relationship that you have with alcohol, because it's not just the health guidelines. I do think that I was sort of in a gray area of drinking. Like, it has caused issues in my life, right? I think just with the stress and drinking and, having these hangovers and anxiety. And also, in hindsight now, at the time I didn't realize, but I think that I was using alcohol. And I think a lot of people do not realize that they're using alcohol to cope with different struggles, traumas, realities of the world, stress, abusive relationships, whatever it is that they're going through. Life, you hate your job, have a glass of wine, right? You feel immediately better.
Right.
So it's...
So when you say that these are reasons, let's just call them benefits that people get from drinking.
Yeah.
What do you do now to then, in your plan, you didn't just think, okay, hey, I'm going to do this. You've always been a planner. You think about what you're going to need and so on. You did that in law school, right?
Yeah.
When it came down to criminal law, I got to do this, I got to do this. So when you had this, you're formulating your plan. What did you say to yourself then in terms of, well, how are you going to then, like you said, you didn't realize these were the reasons you were doing it necessarily. So what was your plan to deal with that?
It is funny. I feel like I usually do have a plan, but this sort of fell into my lap because I think anyone who wants to be sort of healthy and live their best lives, like, I'm very growth oriented. So growth to me is paramount. Freedom, independence, but growth also. I'm a passionate person. I love to apply myself fully to everything that I do. And I had sort of clued into the fact that all the most successful people were sort of sober, right? Like, not in a Puritan kind of way, but these were just people that, like, they don't need substances to get the most out of life, right? Like, these are the people that thrive on waking up really early. And like, now I'm one of those people, right? Like, I wake up really early on my own without an alarm. I don't even drink caffeine. I'm just living my best life. So, but it's so wild because if you told me 3 years ago that I would be sober, like, I would have laughed you out of a room. Like, I loved drinking, and I never swore off alcohol. Like, how people get really hungover and they're like, I'm never drinking. I never said that, even in my worst hangovers. And so that's why I wrote this piece. So on my LinkedIn, I have the piece, 1 year alcohol free, and now it's 2 years alcohol free. And it really blew up because I think a lot of people resonated with the fact that, like, yeah, she never was going to swear off alcohol, right? So it sort of wasn't planned. It's just, I think in the scheme of things, like in the path that I wanted to take in terms of growing as a person, I think that your growth is stunted if you're drinking, right? Depending on the amounts.
Fine. So sure, there's data there's information.
Yeah.
And the thing about data and information, it keeps evolving.
Of course, yeah.
So
the 2 drinks a day used to be like good for the heart, right?
Right? Okay. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But in terms of, like, so you did have a day one, right? You said to yourself, hey, this is day one.
Yeah.
So that is a little bit of a plan.
It is.
And when you said day one, you're like, okay, so today, and then there was day two and week one, and then month one. And when it becomes a thing, right? All of a sudden now, it's like in the front of your mind, and you're like, okay, now I'm not doing this. But then what is it that you realized, for example, where that's just the inconvenient parts, the downsides. You're now not drinking it anymore. You've made this commitment. You're into it for a week. So it's like novel, Yeah. I'm feeling this, I'm up against it, and, okay, I can get you enjoying that part. But then what did you notice were the downsides?
Oh, yeah. Well, so the day one, what happened is I won this big award in the legal community. It's from the Middlesex Law Association. I was the rising star. Okay. So I got notice of that on August 29th of 2022. Okay. It's a big deal that I won it. I was like junior, like it's usually these like big partners in civil firms that win this award. Wow. And I was like the undergrad, like the underdog scrapper, basically. Criminal defense, I think, like it's always like not criminal defense lawyers that were nominated for that award. So I got thank you. I got notice that I won that award, and it was a big deal. So of course I went out to celebrate, and I had 2 stiff Cosmos at my favorite bar. And though, like, I just felt like shit after, right? I had to go nap it off after. So it's not even like I got super drunk or something really bad happened. In fact, it was like a really positive time in my life. I was crushing it in my career. It's been exponential growth since then, which is the big upside about sobriety. But it was like a good day, you know? And after that, I saw the article about how the Canadian guidelines were shifting. And I'd already been, again, sober curious because I'd been working with a dietitian about my gut health. And she said, you should stop drinking for, you know, maybe a month or two and see if that affects things. And it did. So I'd already sort of like toyed with the idea. And I found this app called Reframe, which is it's like you can count your drinks and stuff. It's a sober community. So they have, I started on the cutback. Like I wasn't looking to quit alcohol. So I started on the cutback track with that. And I was just being more mindful about my relationship with alcohol.
Before day one?
Before, yeah. Okay. Before day one, right? But that was like when I got home from winning that award and drinking those Cosmos and needing to nap off these 2 Cosmos that I had. Again, no hangover the next day. Like everything's fine. It's just, I was like, I'm over this, right? And I was like, I saw this article and I was like, 2 drinks a week, right? Because that's what the new guideline is, right?
Oh.
If you have more than 2 drinks.
It's a guideline, right?
Yeah, I'm sort of like anything in moderation, right? So it's my personal choice not to smoke cigarettes, for instance, right? Or now alcohol. I honestly just equate them now. And I think that will become more the norm, right? Everyone, like whenever smoking became uncool, right? I was born in 1990, so I'll be turning 34 in a few weeks. And like when I was growing up, smoking was not cool. It was like if you smoke these things, they'll kill you, right? Okay. And I'm not fully equating alcohol to the same level, but it just seems that research is suggesting now that alcohol is not good for you. And being on the other side of it, I sort of see, but it didn't start out like it. Yeah.
This is the part now I'm understanding is that you were thinking about this for a while, it seems, beforehand.
Yeah, like
how long was that going on?
Like, I think anyone who's in the gray area, right? I'm not talking about the people who have like a glass of champagne at New Year's or they're drinking occasionally, right? But people who like, they're part of the party culture. They like to go hard, right?
Okay.
I was part of that. So sometimes you have the people that fall in that sort of gray area, right? Gray area drinking, or maybe, you know, they have a full-blown addiction to alcohol because that's not talked about. Like, and I think in law, like it's a way bigger problem than people realize because they're not talking about it. So that's why I've decided to be quite vocal about it because I think it's important to show leadership.
Yes.
But anyway, I just think that it's, again, so ingrained in culture. And I just realized that looking at it, I was like, this probably isn't good for me, you know? Like, so it wasn't this conscious thing, like one day I'm going to quit drinking. That was never crossed my mind.
Do you think that was just you, or do you think that anybody that looked at this and actually just looked at the information would start asking the same sort of question? Because you said you're part of a community, so
yeah,
as unique as you are,
yeah.
Do you have to be unique? Do you have to be different in order to walk this path, you think? Or do you think even if you're considering yourself, hey, I'm like everybody else, I take similar paths in so many ways as everybody else, that this is something that was just a result of your thinking about it, and anyone who just kind of thinks about it long enough gets to this point? Or was it just you?
I think it's like, well, also it's sort of like the punk rock in me, and, you know, they have like the straight edge, like I identify to that, right? So it's sort of always, I had this like hiatus, I guess it was, right? And I think it's because I was struggling and dealing with a lot of things, right? You know, like I started drinking in my teen years, right? And it was like almost 20 years of that.
Yeah.
So again, not the daily, not the whatever, but it's just, it caused a lot of turmoil in my life, right? If you look at statistics of divorce, like people who drink are much more likely to get divorcmused. It causes, like, think about the last time maybe you got, I don't know if you drink, but
see, I don't, but for me, it's just been a matter of like, I'm a Muslim. It's forbidden. Yeah. So I don't understand the other side of it.
Yeah.
I can't do it, and that's it.
Yeah.
I get asked, like, have you ever wanted to? I'm like, not really.
Yeah.
I had friends in high school that would be, that even told me themselves, they go, you're not missing out on anything.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And yeah, I remember this.
Okay.
But then others who was like, well, this is, everybody's getting ready for the weekend, and
weekend
this is what it is. And I'm driving, so I'll drive. And that's kind of like where I fit into this whole equation. I didn't really connect. And so when it came out to socializing with people, I wouldn't even get the call. I didn't know what I was missing out on.
Right.
And that was it. So I just kind of, for me, this is like everyday life. But what I've always been curious about has just been that for somebody who's got access to this, who it's not forbidden to you, you could do this anytime you want. Why wouldn't you? You know, like everybody else is doing it.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
And it does make, like, I feel like, especially in the age, like in your teen years, in your early adulthood, where you're trying to figure out who you are, it really does help you maybe bridge those connections. But I do think now, especially in hindsight, so you don't have that lived experience, but alcohol, like you're a few drinks in even, it's like, you know, it'll affect the way that you deal and interact with the world. Like some people, they get really sad when they're drunk. Some people, they get really angry when they're drunk. And that causes issues, right? Bar fights. Like I'm in criminal defense. I'd probably be in way less business if alcohol was not a thing, right? So it's, you know, and the government makes so much money.
So you don't hand out business cards, you hand out drinks. It's just...
yeah. So it's, I just wonder what my life would have been like had I not gone through those almost 20 years of like drinking, right? To varied extents. I'd never really gone a long period. I think I did a dry January maybe in 2021.
Right.
And like whatever. But even going a month without drinking, like it's nothing, right? Like I'm not trying to downplay anyone who reaches that milestone, certainly if they're struggling with addiction. But me having drank for the better part of my life now, it really makes no difference because you don't have to critically look at your life if you go 1 month without drinking. Like if it does that for you, great. But me, it really didn't hit until the 90 days. And I was part of this like sober community. And no one in my circle, despite drinking a lot, was questioning their relationship with alcohol. Not externally anyway. And I didn't even internally, right? I was like, whatever, I drink a lot, but and like, what is a lot, right? Like I like to have lots of drinks on the weekends, for instance, right? And then maybe there's a law event on a Thursday and a Wednesday and it sort of creeps up on you that way, right?
Right.
But even the whole idea of going home and having a bottle of wine, which is, I guess, quite common. I did not realize that, but that's pretty common for people to do, is my understanding, if they're dealing with high stress and whatever it is, right? And now you're making dinner and like having this bottle of wine, right?
So for you, when you were drinking, would you say like, okay, so were you drinking for the same sort of reasons? Was it's like, okay, social, but I'm also coping, I'm also using it for this and the other. What did you now start to have to do instead to cope?
Oh, I'm like still working on that, right? So they consider 2 years like early recovery, right? I mean, not that like, but it's just you have to find other ways. And when we talked earlier about the downsides, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be prepared to deal with the onslaught of like, you know, stress, conflicts with other people if they're not accepting of your sobriety, right? Thankfully, my network has been very supportive of that.
Right.
But like I've walked away from a lot of relationships since I sobered up, right?
That's a price to pay.
It's hard, yeah. And you worry, like I worried about that going into it, but because only one person was truly happy for me when I told them that I wasn't drinking anymore. One person, and it's not even like we're the best of friends, right? Like people are like the people that really care, like my family and like all my sort of closest people, like they're all happy, probably also because they're like, oh good, right? Having been in some of the situations
safer now.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good thing, right? So they're all happy. But you know, my friends that I drank with, like they were all very hesitant, sort of defensive. It's interesting, right? So there was
were there like some very unhappy moments in all of this that take place?
Yeah, and like I wouldn't even call them unhappy. They're moments of growth. Like I really like to, they are.
That's trying to be like positive.
No, I honestly, I like to lean into discomfort. It really is something that I enjoy. And I think that builds resilience. Like it's scary, but I always do that. Like I left my employer of 7 years to open up my own firm, right? Like with nothing, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, I had client base and everything, but it's like, you know, I don't have a plan B.
I think leaning into being uncomfortable or leaning into comfortable and drinking and not drinking have a lot of parallel.
They do. They really do. And that's my whole life, right? This counterculture, like what's comfortable, what's safe, and what do you want, right? Like if you want that, that's great. But nothing about my life has been like that, right? So I'm always looking. It's not this like, it's a drive, right? I feel compelled to grow as a person. And I just felt at some point I came to head with like, this substance is holding me back from reaching my true potential. And now it's like the fog is.
But you were killing it, as you said, while you were drinking.
Well, I thought that I was. Right now I see what really killing it means. But
okay.
It's like the layers.
Help me understand it a little bit better, because it's not like you were unsuccessful.
No, I quit drinking at a time that I was doing very well in life. And to be honest with you, I think that's what allowed me to stop. Because if some people, they hit like a rock bottom and they're forced to stop. Me, it was really this climb.
Yeah.
And I told myself, like, maybe I don't need this crutch anymore, even if I didn't fully appreciate how much of a crutch it was.
Okay.
but I think I was finally like ready to let
For me,
it
it's
go.
ice cream, you know?
Yeah, see?
If
Well,
I'm having
transfer addictions are real.
Right, it's 100%.
Sugar for me, like I've gained like 30 pounds since I stopped drinking.
Okay.
Right? We want to talk downsides. But
Right.
in the long term, it'll be like I already got fit once, right? It's like, and I'm not, you know, like I'm still in a normal weight range.
Right.
It's just, I was gentle with myself, which is hard for me to do. But I was like,
That's when I am. I'm gentle
yeah.
with myself. I'll have the ice cream.
Yeah. So it's like, I definitely got
call
into
it
like a sugar addiction after that. And, you know, I'm gradually weaning off that. But these are things like food addictions, alcohol addictions, like work addictions, right? I'm addicted to work. That's all. There's a reason for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the real, true, deep work, right? Is like, is my identity as a lawyer and a performer and an achiever, right? Like if you peel all of those layers back, what's left, right? And people that's part of why I ride motorcycles, because, and even that I incorporated into my brand. But
so this was just like, it looks like one of those steps on your growth path.
yeah,
You take another piece of you and you say, I'm going to tackle this challenge next. And next I'm going to tackle this. And you're just looking for the next challenge.
Oh, yeah.
And so sobriety to you is just the next challenge.
It is,
It then become like something that defines your life. But you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, like it's a big facilitator. It helps you tip or makes things easier on the other side. But it is harder in some ways. And that's just what I wanted to really understand is like, you have those hardships. You talked about the social pushback that you had.
Yeah.
You talked about, whether it was weight gain, for example, you talked about that. What was there a time during this period that you sort of say to yourself, it's not worth it?
Oh,
Stop. Does that happen?
all the time
Even
still.
to you?
Oh yeah, like it's still like I lately what I've been telling people, because again, I'm in early sobriety. Like 2 years is like early, right? And the relapse rate in 1 year, like that's why I chose not to go public until I hit a year. I knew that I would, because when I want to do something, I just do it. Like I've never not done something that I've really wanted to do.
Like you leverage the ego on that.
Oh yeah, like I'm like all in, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm not going to fail.
And like some people might call me cocky, but it's like I knew that I would never drink again.
Wow.
Like that's just something that I know will never happen again. I'm very confident on that, because I sort of found my why, right? Like no one would ever offer me a cigarette right now and be like, well, why not? Right? And maybe they're not there yet and society's not there yet. I'm always sort of like ahead of the curve that way, I think. But it's just like, eventually we're going to get to a point, even if a lot of people are still drinking, where if you offer someone a drink and they say no, you're just going to be like, that's fine, right? It's just a little wild, a little silly to me now, but.
So when you had these moments that you're like, this is tough, maybe not, you said, this is my why. Is that it? Is that how it worked?
It's the why.
Or was it, what else? That's it? That's enough to get you through it?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have convictions, like, what are you doing? Right?
I'm just here to understand.
Yeah.
So
like,
it's like,
I think I'm someone who really deeply, like if I make a decision,
Yeah.
right? And I always reserve the right to be wrong, right? Like,
Sure.
you know, maybe in 5 years we'll meet and I'll be a total lush, right? I don't know. Because again, you see it's not just the health, right? Because like, I don't know, it for me, it's just, I think it is part of who I am. I think I just lost my way for a long time. And I know that sounds crazy, because it's like, if you drink for longer than you haven't, like, how can you say that? But
the other question that I wonder is, how do you tell somebody who's doing well that you're lost in some ways? Like you're doing well relatively to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like you said, you didn't come from certain privileges, right? You're working your way. You're noticing that you're successful while doing this. And how do you start saying to yourself, well, this is a cause for my, I'm lost here. Nobody believes that they're lost when they're sometimes lost even, right? So how do you convince somebody? And how did you do that to yourself? But you said to yourself, somehow it's a combination of experiences that you talked about. But I'm interested in understanding that when you were at this point, that when it was tough, after, the first month, there's the novelty wears off.
Oh yeah. They call it the pink cloud. The pink cloud is when you're like on cloud 9, like I'm sleeping better, like, my skin's glowing.
Right.
Like, when that wears off, it is hard. And in the piece that I wrote, because I am going to write a follow-up piece, I think, on like the darker parts of this path, right?
This is what I want to understand.
It is so hard.
Okay.
Like, I find not drinking really easy. What's hard is dealing with all of your problems sober, right? So again, there are lots of people who don't drink at all, or they really just drink occasionally, so it doesn't impact sort of like how they're dealing with the world. But even if you're having like beers after work on, you know, like even drinking once a week, or even, you know, that dry January did nothing for me in terms of like what's really going on, right? So
you had to get to that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. My months 6 to 12, I think that I just cried like all the time. Like, but I'm exaggerating.
Was that an indicator to you that like this is not worth it? Maybe doing this is wrong because I don't feel so good. You know, you have a feeling, right? Like, what am I doing this for? Like,
that's where I think
how did you stay on that?
Yeah, I just felt it more. This is a symptom of the discomfort of the growth, right? I think I needed to let out all that stress and all that, you know. If you have a problem, like if you're stressed out, or you have to have a difficult conversation with someone, or, you know, you're trying to like avoid something, just have a drink, right?
Right.
Like you don't appreciate that because you don't drink, but that was really effective for me. Like stressful day at work, drink.
Yeah.
Big win in court, 10 drinks, right?
Right. Right.
That's a big night, right?
Right.
And I had some of my hardest moments in my career, like since sobering up.
So in that moment, what did you do then?
Lots of tears.
Okay.
I'm a big crier, I guess, right? Like, not publicly, but, you know, I had a really hard loss in court one day, and it was just, there were circumstances, I won't get into the specific, but there were circumstances with that offender where it was just so difficult, and that really affected me. And I was so distraught after that loss that I left the courtroom, and even before I left, I was just like bawling, right? And I remember I ran into one of my colleagues who's at the Crown's office, really, really nice Crown. And this person just saw me, and I could see their face like, oh my gosh, like Sam's having a really bad day. But everyone has those days. Like, I've seen other colleagues do that
100%.
too. So anyway, I made it at the court, and I couldn't even like text my colleagues and my support networks because I was just so distraught, right? So I'm someone I think who just needs time on my own to be able to decompress, and that's fine too, right? And then you know, I went on from there, but it's just I have to find other ways of coping with that stress. So and that loss and that grief, like, you know, I haven't had someone close to me pass away, for instance, is a big thing that people struggle with after because I think, and a lot of relapses happen at a grief stage or a big breakup or whatever it is, right? So I'm conscientious of that, right? Despite my ego and my confidence that life is gonna life, right?
Life is gonna life.
And probably life is gonna life harder if you don't have those like TV is a distraction, right? I don't watch TV.
Right.
But I know that that's a big one too. Food.
Yeah.
So like sugar has definitely been something I've like leaned into for the dopamine, right? You get these dopamine hits.
Right.
And you get instantaneous dopamine when you consume something, right? And I don't smoke weed. I don't even have coffee anymore, right? And that I stopped.
That's pretty boring, Sam. That's what you're gonna hear.
Yeah.
It's boring.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like I'm anything but boring. So it's like I don't need.
That's what I think is.
I don't need to do the exciting things or the like things that are like coffee is so normalized, right? Don't get me wrong. I love coffee. Like people give me a lot of hate when I'm like, I don't drink caffeine. They're like one of those. So I was like, no. I loved coffee so much that I have natural energy. I'm a naturally like morning person. I don't need a lot of sleep a lot of the time. Like I'm just very driven.
I just feel like my argument is by taking these. I consider them to be like, say, prompts.
Yeah.
So prompts for the dopamine, prompts for whatever.
Yeah, dopamine, yeah.
By relying on a prompt, I feel like I stunt the natural resources that we have within us to be able to do it. And once we take away these prompters, right, and we start tapping into our actual resources, the feeling of power that we get, the empowerment, the dopamine is all the same, except now it's coming from us. We control it.
Exactly. Natural dopamine.
Yeah.
It's a thing.
Yeah. I know it.
Yeah.
And it is a thing. And I'm like, And I don't, like you called it a crutch.
Yeah.
And I go, I feel like stronger that I don't need a crutch. And that just having that mental state transfers to another place where I feel like I need a crutch. And now I don't need a crutch there anymore because I'm like, why? But I don't need a crutch here. This mental
it's empowering.
state, I think it is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, how do you say that to like what's normal?
Yeah.
Right.
And so I've been really big on not telling people what to do, right? Like
Sure.
everyone close.
Right.
Like I have one sober friend, right?
2 now.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, there's lots. Actually.
Yeah. And like, so I'm excited to be, to get to know you.
Yeah, I think that's what connected us.
It is what connected us. So I'm really thrilled about that because no one in my circles as I had them, but I'm growing as a person, right? So my circles are going to change now.
Right.
And that's so scary when you're leaving everything you know behind, right? It is what it is, right? But I made that choice for myself, and I still have connections with the people that I was closest to when I was drinking. Right. But yeah, my priorities are changing, right? And I'm someone who's always growing. There's the many seasons of Sam, right. But my core values are still the same. It's just I feel like I'm becoming more who I have been all along.
Right.
So it's really been this journey of rediscovering who I am. Like I feel more connected with like my punk roots and like the straight edge. Like I'm going to get a straight edge tattoo for my 2-year, right? It's just, so I'm like listening to all the music that I was listening to then. And and I'm also going to have to face all of the things that I think drove me to drink, right? So stress management is going to be a big one with what I do, right? Sure. I am going to have to deal with those really tough moments and all the sort of like vicarious trauma that we as lawyers experience.
Right.
But also, relationships and sort of difficulties that we go through, right? Like if someone really close to me died tomorrow, like I would have to go through that.
Sure.
And previously, like if you've never drank, then you don't know any different, but I know that there's an easy out. Right?
Right.
And I also want to be mindful of like the transfer addiction, like especially with the, I have to be mindful of all of those things, right? So even like getting back to the gym, like I know it's all going to happen in its own sort of time frame, right? But I don't want to, become orthorexic and too like restrictive about what I'm doing or overexerting myself either, right? I'm really focused on the long run now and like how can I live my life in a way that's balanced, because I'm not a very balanced person, admittedly. But really working on those root issues, right? And a lot of them come from childhood, right? Our parents always do the best that they can. But attachment wounds and just the realities of, how we're raised, those impact us very deeply, much more deeply than I think we realize as adults.
I know you're not into, and you don't come across as like, the preacher type. You're not trying to propagate, hey, everybody do this. That's not what you're saying. You're just saying, hey, this is what I did.
It's a path.
And this is what I'm noticing, and I'm sharing that. But I feel like in that, and this is kind of why I think it's so helpful, is that I think a lot of people out there are looking for an answer for something, and they don't have this sense of hope, because they're not sure where to start looking for an answer.
Yeah.
Right. So somebody might say, hey, I'm really struggling here, mentally. You hear that a lot.
Yeah.
And the one thing that gives them comfort is this. And from what I hear you saying, it's the one thing that'll give you more comfort if you get away from. That's what I find very helpful to people. And really, I think you and a lot of people want to see these people who are going through these challenges, who are going through who are suffering.
Yeah.
To ease off their suffering. And you feel like, hey, maybe you could try this.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe you could try this. Yeah. Again, you're not telling somebody how to live, but you just want to ease them off of their suffering.
Yeah.
And they're your colleagues, they're friends, they're your neighbors, right? They're community members and part of your humanity. So like to that end, right? When you see this, people say, what would you say then to somebody who's like, here's an easy step or a place to start that you found if you had gone through it once. Hindsight, you sort of look at some things, you go, hey, this would make it easier.
Yeah.
What makes it easier to take these first steps? And I'm not talking just about sobriety. It's about taking and trying to break, any habit that you would say is not good for you.
Yeah.
Because the ones that are, not good for you are the ones that feel the best too.
Yeah.
Somehow they're because of the dopamine.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what are like some of the early steps somebody could take that you would say, having gone through your experience, works?
I think you really have to know yourself, and you have to be ready, right? Like, I think everyone wants to like be fit or quit smoking or, you know, drink less or make more money, right? Those things are all
What do you mean by being ready?
Like, you have to be ready to want to do it, right? You can't just like want it for the idea of it. Like, oh, I want a 6-pack. Like, you have to actually know that it's going to take something from you, right? And you have to be willing to give that. So I find the execution really easy, right? Just do the things. That's not what people struggle with, I think. I think what people actually struggle with is like, why, right? Why do I want that? And if you don't have the right reason, then it's not going to happen, right? Because you're going to lose your motivation and you need the discipline. So I find that
how do you find your why?
A lot of introspection, a lot of journaling, and having community helps you once you want to do that. But I think you have to really know yourself, right? So for me, for instance, like I lost that 50 pounds, right? I struggle with sort of like weight fluctuations, right? But I know ultimately, especially now in my sobriety, like if I could get super fit when I was like drinking all the time, which you can't even burn fat when you drink alcohol. It's literally like ethanol in your body. So it's going to be much easier, you know, next time.
Right.
Or just generally, like I'm learning more about like balance, right? Like you don't have to be a freak in the gym for 2 hours a day. Like you can just make small habits and changes over years, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, if you want to be healthy because you want to avoid problems in your life, mobility later, whatever. And I'm not someone who's like a health nut, right? Like I'm more about like experience. Like I love to travel and I love like my career always comes first, right? So it's like I didn't even have breakfast today. I don't even, you know, so it's just like, which is bad, right? Like it's always like do the thing, like, or, you know, and then there's people that are like team fasting. So you can't really like listen to all the noise around you. You really have to like introspect as to what you want and why you want it.
And so when you say introspect, it's hard just to set time aside to do this. We're busy going from one thing to the next thing. There's always a notification that we got to get to.
Yeah.
How do you find, what's the strategy to sit down and introspect? Like what?
You have to remove the distractions, right? Like I don't even have social media on my phone anymore at all.
Right.
And a lot of people, they like to get up and immediately get on their email and be on their phone all the time. I'm a workaholic, I get it. But there's actually like a happiness course through Yale that you can do for free. And they suggested actually cutting out social media. So I use it for branding. Like I don't think that I'll get off social media. I'll probably outsource that.
It's a tool, right?
But if you check out my social media, it's very geared to my sort of branding and my what I'm up to. So I'll definitely be posting about this. But it's I log onto my desktop, right? I put my post and then I get out of Dodge, right? I log off. I don't even answer my comments. Like I'm just too busy, right? I don't watch TV. So it's just like I try to eliminate all of these distractions that I know are not really serving me. Like what's serving you, right? Like if you're going to scroll on Instagram for 2 hours a day and you don't even realize that you're doing it, right? Until you realize that
I don't know. I don't have Instagram.
See, you got to figure it out.
I don't have, I just never,
Yeah. So it's
a different path, but
exactly. So it's I'm finding my path, right? And so I find that removing distractions is scary because it takes you away from the chatter in your mind, right? And so meditation is helpful for that too. And I wasn't really about meditation until more recently, but it is very helpful now. So and I just having the natural dopamine and like removing those distractions. So I feel high is really high and I feel low is really low.
Sure.
And it's very intense, right? So alcohol helped take the edge off, you know, or just having difficult feelings, right?
Right.
People are really struggling. And so I don't tell people how to live, right? But I have told them like, you know, maybe you want to consider this, right? And I find most of the times people don't do it. And I just think it's because they're not ready, right? Or maybe they don't want to do that. And that's fine too, right? Like I do think that there are mental health trade-offs to drinking. Like if drinking is going to allow you to cope with life so that you can get by, that's some people's reality. And when you talked about like, do you ever question, like sometimes I do question that, right? Like, would it just be better to like go back?
But then you said yourself, you noticed that you were far better off.
Far better off. Like, and this
what's the far better off? Give me that.
Oh my gosh, like just always feeling your real feelings, right? Like you're not blunting anything. You're truly in the moment. You remember everything.
Yeah.
You can drive yourself anywhere you want, anytime. That's a smaller thing, right? But just truly waking up every day and being like, I can do this. Like I feel unstoppable now, right? like there's nothing holding me back anymore. And
you're attributing it to this?
Yeah, I think it honestly, I've accomplished so much. I think it is my grit. Like, I think the number one indicator.
Like maybe you were always meant to be successful.
I think that it's grit, right? Yeah. And even like when I launched my own business, like people were like, "You're crazy," right? Like, or like, "That's gutsy." And I'm like, honestly, what's the worst that could happen? What, I go bankrupt? Like, I don't have kids, or if it, like, who cares, right? I mean, that could be seen as a little reckless, but I know that I'm gonna be fine. Like, I don't even drink. It's like, what's the worst that could happen to me, right? I'm so aware of my surroundings. I know what I want. Or if I'm not sure about what I want, then I know that I can figure it out in time, right?
I think of it sometimes as kind of like, you talked about blunting. The thought that came to my mind was blurring.
Yeah.
It's like, because we don't want to see things, we take things so that we're just a little bit blurred, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, everybody, if anyone's ever had like poor eyesight and then they put on a lens and they go, wow, this looks so much clearer now. I feel like by not having these things that blur or blunt us, the picture gets a lot clearer.
And you don't even know what you're
beautiful, right? You get to see a lot more detail now that you never noticed before. I feel like that's how it would feel like.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the other side looks like.
And I do, because I had like probably none of your viewers watching have worse vision than I had. I have 20/20 vision now because I got LASIK, because I convinced the LASIK people to give it to me, right? They're like, no. And I was like, why? Because I'm a lawyer, right? So I was like, I can cross-examine experts for a living. I'm not afraid of you surgeons, right? So I was like, tell me why, right? And anyway, now I have 20/20 vision, but my prescription was a negative 12.75 in both eyes, like just so, but like I couldn't see anything, right? So I love your analogy because I lived that, right? Literally. And when I got the LASIK and I was putting the drops in and the clarity came, because now I have 20/20 vision, like 2 years later. And when I put those drops in and the clarity came, I cried so hard. Like, I don't think I've ever cried that hard in my life, because it was such a beautiful moment. And I remember I shared that. And, you know, lots of people have gotten LASIK since then, right? And since going sober, I have met more people now that are 6 to 12 months sober since my announcement than I had ever met in my life.
Wow. So it compounds.
It does, yeah. And so I never tell people what to do. I like to live my life as an example, right? But it's my path, right? Path. It's not everyone's path. There are people who, you know, will drink their whole lives, and that's fine. There are people who smoke their whole lives, and that's fine. They maybe don't want to change that. So that's, you know, all the power to them if they realize what they want and what works for them. But for the people that are wondering, right, or they think like, oh, I couldn't do that.
Right.
It's like, why though? Right? Why? And just ask yourself that, right? Ask why until you can't explain anything more, or till you have your answer, right? So same with the surgeons, right? Why? Why can't you give me LASIK? Right? And, you know, it was because of they were worried about a condition, but I was like, but you don't know the interplay, right? And isn't that my decision to make? Right? So I'm very, when I want something, I get it, right? So even I drove my car, I have literally a no jail license plate, right? And I had to fight Service Ontario for that because they wouldn't give it to me. They're like, this is an expression of a political opinion. It's one of the barred reasons that you can't have your license plate. So I, of course, appealed them and I won, right? I wrote them this crazy appeal about, no, it's not the expression of a political opinion. It's the expression of a constitutional right not to be denied bail without just cause. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. It's a company car. So they gave that plate to me and I wear it very proudly now. Other than sobriety, it's one of my top accomplishments, I think. So, people have their path, right? And I'm just on mine, but I do think that the world is changing. And I mean, you look at everything going on in the world and like, no wonder, like it's like sort of tempting to drink, right? Or to just sort of numb or find a way to not TV, whatever it is, right? Everyone has their thing, right? And, you know, one could argue that work is my thing now, right? Like I just bury my head in work. But I really, like for me, it's not work, right? It's really a calling. Like if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would still be doing what I do.
When does it
would just look very different.
When does it go for you, do you think, from I'm sober to I'm just living? Like it's not a thing anymore.
Yeah, I would say probably after a year. Like when I hit my 1 year, now it's, I don't even think about it, right? But really the the light switch, I think, happened, the aha moment was at 90 days. If you can make 90 days and you're really looking at not just trying to get through without drinking. Of course, some people are sort of in that position, like do what works for you. But if you want to improve your life, or you feel like you're in a rut, or you're not happy, maybe you need to switch things up a little bit, right? And try to go 90 days. And if you could make 90 days, try to go 6 months. Right. And if you can make 6 months, try to go a year, right? And
kind of like small
and
bites.
most people don't make a year. I think it's like 86% of people will relapse, right? They'll have
it's like starting a business.
Yeah. Oh,
we'll talk about that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. But, so, you know,
it's always that first year. It's always those early days.
Yeah.
Launching requires I call it like a space shuttle launch.
Yeah.
That's when the most amount of energy and fuel needs to get burned just to get off the ground. Mm. And then once you're on a course, then, you know.
Yeah, I think if you hit that 90 days, because that's where you sort of have to like get through certain, you know, someone's going to have a birthday party, or like there's going to be a holiday.
Right.
If you can make it through that and you start having conversations with people, you might be surprised that people are more supportive. Like in my case, it wasn't that people were like, oh, well, that sucks, we don't like you anymore. Like it wasn't like that. It was just like, oh.
Last thought, okay? Mm-hmm. I also feel like people don't give themselves as much credit sometimes as they deserve. They think that they're weaker than they really are.
Yeah.
I feel like they're stronger than they give themselves credit to be. Did you find that?
Absolutely. I fully agree with that. I think it's so true. You don't even know what you're capable of, right? Like just imagine, like everything that I've accomplished since I stopped drinking, and it's not just that. I do think there is like an innate, like if someone's driven, they're going to get there. But it's like this barrier, right? Like I just feel so much more free now, and I want to, like, that's part of why I wrote that piece, and I want to get that message out to as many people as possible. So I encourage everyone I share it with everyone on LinkedIn, but it's just like, you don't even know, right? Like I didn't even know, and I feel so butthurt. Like I'm not about regretting and whatever, like, but I feel if I would, like the reason that I never smoked, right, was because I learned things very early, and society was sort of already there, right? Like don't smoke. With alcohol, obviously, that's not the case, and maybe it won't change, but I think it will. Like, I think in 50 years, like, drinking will be much more like cigarette smoking, right? And people will look back and sort of be like, oh, that was, maybe I'm wrong, right? But that's what I honestly think is coming in the future, and I think that people, you can do the hard things. We can do the hard things, and it's amazing once you allow yourself to do that. And I have lots of way harder things to face, right? So they say new levels, new devils, right?
But now you can go after them because you got like,
the hardest part yet to come for me.
Well, you get another notch in the belt. Like I feel like I did this, and then you're building a momentum now.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
It really helps you get along. But go after the hard stuff.
Yeah, and we can do it. So
thank you, Sam.